Um, hello, so I'm Faye Wade, also a second-year PhD researcher at the Energy Institute, and I'm going to talk about my PhD, which is investigating central heating installation and use. First of all, I will cover why I'm looking at heating, and then I will talk about how I'm doing this, and I will provide some initial data as well. So, okay, the context is, of course, energy. 60% of domestic energy consumption is through space heating. 85% of our heating systems are gas. So basically the focus of my research is gas central heating. And what I'm doing is questioning what are we currently doing in terms of reducing the energy consumed through these systems. So as it stands, we have two basic strategies. The first is to focus on the technical parameters of the systems in use. And the second is to look at the social aspect. Sorry, the technical parameters of the system itself, and then the second is to look at the social aspect of the system in use. So this is kind of demonstrated here. Sorry, I'm slightly confused by the colours, because these aren't what I chose. But basically, what I'm trying to demonstrate on this side, you've got a slide that talks about the building regulations. So what we have is this technical approach to encourage or mandate the installation of more efficient systems. So, for example, we now have the building regs which state that properties have to be zoned with particular types of control. As Bill and Adrian have talked about, we're increasing the complexity of the controls in domestic properties. The person expected to operationalize these regulations is the system installer. But I would argue that what we need to do is question to what extent do the building regulations actually feed into installer practices. Are installers reading the regulations, and are they doing what the regulations say? The second, quite disparate strategy is to encourage people to reduce their thermostat set points, try to make them use their heating systems more efficiently. Now, there are two problems with this approach. There's a lack of understanding, or worse, an inability to locate system controls in homes. So we have two quotes from some Rathouse and Young focus groups that were carried out in 2004 here. The first one, all I know is you turn the thermostat round and it will come on when you want it to. You just click it round and then it fires up. So this is somebody treating their thermostat as a switch for the heating system. The second quotes, these are about the location. So we have people here having to go into the cupboard with ladders to find their heating controls. They use torches. They're in cupboards and you can't see the dials. So I would argue that we need to question if people don't understand or they can't find their heating controls, how can we assume that telling them to reduce the set point by 1 degree will lead them to do it? The second point about these information campaigns is that they rely on the individualistic economic approach of the rational actor, which fails to account for the formation of habitual space heating practices and the wider network of actors that are actually involved in this process. So on the next slide, we have another quote from the Rathouse and Young focus groups here. People reported asking installers, plumbers, and engineers to show them how to use their controls and sometimes to set their programmers. So I wouldn't say definitively that everybody speaks to their installer, but there is evidence to show that the installer is important in this process. Now, just to recap, the installer is basically involved in the technology design, so determining the configuration of the system in the home. They're expected to operationalize the building regulations in homes. They can act as advisors to customers, influencing both the physical parameters of the system, but also the system in use. And it's also worth noting that the householder is rendered reliant on the installer because of the gas-safe requirements. So to actually touch a gas appliance in a home, you're supposed to be gas-safe qualified. And so this isn't an actor that we can bypass in the process. So to frame my research, I'm looking at science and technology studies or theories from this body. And basically, what this acknowledges is the interdependent nature of science, technology, and society. So in my case, rather than looking at just the installer, just the householder, what I'm trying to do is account for a much wider network of influences. So you've got manufacturers, suppliers, the installer's colleagues, the technology itself, and all of the different components of that. And it's worth noting, one of the key ideas that I'm exploring is practice theory. So this is where the actor is viewed as a carrier of routines, rather than as an independent individual. And it looks at how these are shaped by norms, values, habitus, upbringings, but also social norms and factors like this. And I'm just wondering really whether the installation or replacement of central heating systems can be viewed as a point of the disruption in practices. So can we see this as a point of change in what people are doing? So what am I actually doing? I'm using ethnography, which is a qualitative research approach. It uses a suite of methods. So I observe situations, I interview people, informally interview people, take photographs, audio recordings, and basically what I'm trying to do is immerse myself in the installer's world. So I have 3 basic research questions. How is the installer's decision-making process shaped? How does this influence the configuration of the system that's installed in the home? And how does the installation process influence domestic space heating practices? So basically on the left, your left-hand side, we have kind of the wider network. So this is the industry, if you like. And I'm positioned at this intersection between the industry and the installer themselves. So I'm looking at the training of the installers and the role of groups like plumbers merchants. And basically I'm doing that by spending time within those areas. So on Monday I was at a training session observing what the installers are being told. Next week I'm going out to a plumber's merchant and I'm going to just spend the day there and look at basically how they may influence the installer's choices. And then the second intersection is that between the installer and the user. So what happens in the home? What is the installer actually fitting? What are they communicating to the user of the system? And the data I gather from this is a series of field notes, photographs, audio recordings. I also have documentation, so PowerPoint presentations that the installers are shown, instruction manuals, installation guides, everything like that. So, ethnography is an iterative approach. I have gone into this with an open mind, intentionally so, because there isn't much existing research on the role of installers. And so what I wanted to do was go out there and find out what the issues were. And so what I'm doing is relying on my data to tell me. I collect data, I come back, I analyze the data, and then I feed that analysis into future data collection. So I've done essentially 1 round of data collection and analysis, and I've identified a series of key themes that are coming from the data. So, for example, we have here the installation network. These are intentionally broad. So they're broad, so they can encompass a lot of different things at this stage, and I intend to narrow them down as I move forward. But they're narrow enough to actually mean something. So, yeah, the installation network is this whole aspect of the manufacturers, the training providers, what is shaping installer practices. There are things like constructions of customers. So how do the installers view their customers? What stereotypes are there about customers, if you like, and how do these actually shape what's going into the home? Those are just a couple of examples, but what I'm going to do is talk you through some of my data. This is just one example, and I will relate this back to the themes in a moment and hopefully illustrate how this is all working. Okay. So I want to take you into an occupied property where the final stages of a boiler replacement were taking place. A heating engineer had fit the boiler the previous day, and on this particular morning, an electrician, John, had come in to fit the controls. The boiler was in an upstairs bedroom where John was completing some wiring. John started to position the backplate for the programmer when he said he'd better just check that this is where they want it. He went downstairs to get the householder. When he was down there, I heard him ask the householder whether they wanted the controls hiding, and asked them to come upstairs so he could show them. He positioned the programmer right underneath the boiler on the left-hand side. It was very close to the boiler and the pipework. There was also a large wardrobe to the left of it. The customer said that the programmer would be great in that position and that it would be good hidden. So what you have on this image is the boiler itself, and hopefully you can see the programmer just in the bottom corner there. So here we have some communication happening between the installer and the householder to determine the location of the controls. Now, I've picked up on this example because, as I said previously, the location of the controls may influence their use, particularly if they're difficult to access. Now, I think that the language here, referring to the programmer being hidden, is hugely revealing about how it may be used. So to unpick this further, I want to discuss what happened about half an hour later when John was downstairs finishing off wiring in the thermostat. Okay, So at this point, we were next to the living room, where the householder was. John popped his head around the door and asked if he could just explain what he had done and show her the controls. He led the way upstairs and into the front bedroom. On the way, John said to the householder that he hoped she was listening, as there would be a test at the end, and indicated towards me. We went to the bedroom, where John first went through the operation of the boiler. He then moved on to the programmer. So this is the programmer that was installed, stating, "Okay, I don't know if you're going to use it. A lot of people aren't bothering, but I'll run you through it." John went through a systematic process of explaining how to set the on-off times of the programmer and demonstrated by pressing the relevant buttons. After this, the householder said, "So for now, it's just on. It's not got a set time, so I can do it." John replied, "No, actually, if we want to do it that way, what I'll do is leave it on continuous and we'll work on the thermostat." He went on to say, I mean, there's no reason why you can't. I don't use my timer. We got used to it when my boys were babies. We still do it now, and there's actually a new thinking that it's supposed to be more energy efficient, which is keeping the fabric of the building ticking over. So they recommend that you turn it down to 15 minimum, and then when you want full use, turn it back up again. But I'll tell you, I've been doing this a long time, and these ideas go backwards and forwards. He went on to say, "You know the building, you know the house. You've got double glazing, but keep an eye on your bills. Just be sensible. Don't have the heating on and the windows open. Keep the heat in and the cold out. That's what we want to do." So, in this moment, although the installer encourages the householder not to open the windows when the system is in use, he set the programmer to continuous and suggested that operating the heating system via the thermostat is what works for him and is, according to new thinking, the most efficient way to operate it. Now, is there a possibility that the location of the controller, combined with the installer's advice, might encourage the householder to operate the system via the thermostat rather than the programmer? I just want to finish by taking you back into the property 2 days later, when I returned to watch the system being commissioned. This is a process of testing and signing off the boiler, and at this stage the system should be fully operational. Now here is an image of the boiler and the programmer in their final position, after the bedroom contents had been returned. The items on the surface are almost literally hiding the programmer. So in case you haven't spotted it, it's there. And when I looked, the programmer was set to constant and the system was being operated via the thermostat. Now hopefully, what this example has demonstrated is A, the complexity of the situation, the different things that the installer is drawing on, the communication that happens between installer and householder in order to reach a final conclusion. Now, in here, if we relate back to the previous themes, you can see that there is some element of the physicality of the heating system, and how maybe the position of the controller, the position of the boiler may influence the way it's used. We have some element of decision-making, so how the installer actually decides where to fit this thing. And we also have this information transfer process. The installer appeared to be drawing on examples from external experts, maybe, this new thinking. I'm not entirely sure where that comes from. And that's essentially all I wanted to demonstrate. That's just some preliminary data that I have. And as I say, I'm currently back in the field trying to focus this more, looking at what the installers essentially are saying themselves and trying to bring those ideas out and disseminate that information. So that's everything.